last one. And do we know who it was written to or for?
People that needed to know their belief.
Okay.
Well, to Christians.
What was that?
To Christians.
To Christians. Okay. So, kind of a combination of both of those. It was written to Christians, as far as we know, but Christians who were doubting, who needed reassurance that Jesus was who he said he was. And that's kind of important because it helps us understand the focus of the book. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but it's different than the other three in that focus. So remember that as we're going through it. Yes.
That time frame, I think is very important in relation to the focus also, because that's like the first generation away from Christ. Christ died in 33, this is 85, 90, 95, somewhere in there. So John's still around, you still got some of the old folks, but the next generation that may not have known Christ personally, that their parents are telling them this story, that it's that group that's, okay, who is this really? Why are we doing this?
Well, and obviously, the application for us is hopefully to help us with the next generation. I mean, hopefully it encourages you in your faith as well, but we're all worried about the next generation and the generation after them. And if John can help us to help them, then that's, to me, one of the big values of this book. What else do we know about John?
They live a lot.
Okay. As far as we know, I think he was the last apostle alive.
Yeah.
So that's also interesting and, as Peter said, unfair.
Right.
And he's the only one that died of natural causes.
Yeah, again, unfair. What else?
He didn't abandon Jesus on the cross,
Okay,
and he was entrusted to take care of Mary.
okay. So when Donna said that he was the disciple that Jesus loved, I jokingly said he loved all of them, which I think we all agree with. But there's, what? Well, if I have to believe that he even loved Judas, because if he can love Judas, then he can love me. But that does bring out the point. He definitely loved Judas and the other apostles in a different way than he loved John. It seems very clear that there's something closer about John, which is kind of hard to grapple with when you're thinking about Jesus. Warren?
And it's interesting that this book, it doesn't have any parables. He really tried to get straight to the point on a lot of things. In comparison to the other book he wrote, Revelation, where the whole world, a lot of the world still doesn't understand what that book really means and how that means.
Yeah, it is interesting when you're thinking about John that this book is so straightforward and Revelation is the most confusing book, and the same guy wrote both of them. He didn't want to be pigeonholed, obviously, as a writer. As far as, my hearing is terrible, so if you say something and I don't hear you, raise your hand or say it again. And I also hear a lot of things that aren't there, so it's going to be a really exciting class for you guys. And when I hear things that aren't there, it makes me lose my train of thought. We were talking about go ahead, Donna.
Well, if John is John and is also one of the sons of thunder, maybe he's number one young and rash, and then he becomes so convinced that Jesus is the Christ, he has this big change. Wouldn't you have special feelings for somebody who'd made such a big change in their life? As a normal human being, wouldn't you say,
Well, and I think that's that's the point I was trying to get to, is thinking of Jesus as a normal human being. I'm not sure that that would be enough for me with John, because, you know, James also was a son of thunder and relatively young and left, you know, everything to go. So all of them sacrificed quite a bit to be apostles. And it seems like Jesus appreciated that. But I do agree with you, there's something special about John that's hard to pinpoint. But for me, it helps me understand Jesus more as a human, because we all have people we're closer to. And if he was just 100% a deity, he probably wouldn't have had what we would consider a best friend. But knowing that he was a man and he needed that relationship here on earth is confusing. It's hard to think about it that way, but it's also a little bit reassuring knowing that he was tempted. He did have a lot of the same problems and a lot of the same issues that we have. Dad?
John was also part of that inner circle of Christ, besides just being the one he loved and he trusted his mother to. Peter, James, and John were at the Mount of Transfiguration. They were in the garden with him. This was the inner circle, even among the apostles, that were closest to Jesus and knew him probably better than any of the rest of them.
Artemi?
I think special for John, he's gone up. He's gone up to prepare four gospel. Three is synoptic and one is common. He testified what he saw. All another testified what they listened. He testified what he saw.
Well, and that does highlight a difference that, and I think Warren kind of touched on that too, that the first three Gospels are trying to, you know, kind of tell like Artemi said, a synoptic, a whole story of the whole thing. This doesn't even really touch on Jesus' birth at all. I mean, it kind of hints at it in the first part, but it doesn't, which today, that's a huge, important detail that we really focus a lot on. John pretty much ignores it. So it really does highlight the focus of him, that he's trying to show what he saw as a testimony. This is real. And going back to my dad's comment of this is the second generation after Jesus died, I saw this. I saw this, and this is real, and this is why I was so close with Jesus, because he was the Son of God. So as we're studying through, we want to really remember those details and the reason why we're studying this one. Anything else on John the person?
So, spoiler alert, I'm doing my sermon in a couple weeks on the life of John. And what was interesting, somebody brought up Son of Thunder. I'm not sure you can describe it better, backhanded compliment. Thunder is loud, obnoxious. But it was that same zeal that he carried throughout his life that allowed him to write 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And so Jesus shaped him. He shaped that zeal. He shaped that thunder. And you fast forward in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, where he's an OG writing to the people. And it's interesting. You wonder how. I'm assuming Jesus knew what was going to happen in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and we had to correct the believers. And you wonder why Jesus. He was there with him at the cross. He trusted Mary. He trusted him to take care of Mary. And he survived. He survived all that persecution. I mean, it's remarkable that he got to that chapter. And he shaped him throughout his life. That young zeal as a 25-year-old man, or whoever it was, and all those crazy things that he had experienced. And he was there and he saw it.
It's interesting to think about John specifically, but in the broader sense that you cannot not be affected by Jesus. You're affected somehow. You cannot live on this earth and not be affected by his life in some way. And we have an example of 11 people who were affected in very different ways, but almost all positive, and one person who was completely negative. And in some ways, it's very frustrating that we're looking around this room and we can all think about people that are here not being affected positively by Jesus' life. But in another way, it takes a little of that burden off knowing that it was up to John to react the way he did. It was up to Judas to react the way he did. Jesus was Jesus, and everybody had a slightly different reaction to him, and every one of you has a slightly different relationship with him depending on your circumstances, your personality, and the choices you've made. But really, it's a binary choice. You're either going to follow him or not, and then there's a lot of variables that go into that. But that's up to you. And I find it really interesting as we're looking at John's life, how profoundly Jesus affected him and what it would have been like to be Jesus' best friend. And not that we can have that exact same relationship that John had with Jesus, but we can get close. We can try to have as close a relationship with Jesus. That's all on us. And Jesus is just sitting there waiting for us to reach out to him. He's there. And as we go through seeing that, trying to put myself in John's place, and would I have reacted the way John did? We kind of jokingly said that, I said that it wasn't fair that John got to live so long and he died, not upside down on a cross. But the flip side is that he had to live that long and he had to live through persecution. And I think it was Peter that said, I long to be in heaven. It's better for me to go to heaven, but basically, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. God wants me here. And it's great that John got to live and all that, but he had a lot more responsibility too. And it's interesting thinking about what God is expecting you to do. Some of you are going to live a very long life, and some of you may not. I think everybody can look at everybody else's life and go, that's pretty easy. But some of you have had a much harder life, and some of you have had a not quite as hard a life. But we've all had trials, and they're all a little different. And I'm speaking for myself, but I think you'd probably agree with me. There are a lot of trials that other people have that I would rather have than my own trials. And I'm sure John felt that way too, in some instances. I don't know what it was like to take care of Mary after Jesus died and there was 3 hours of darkness and the dead had raised and the temple had been, the veil had been torn in two. I don't think that was a real peaceful, easy time to be taking care of another Christian. So, John had a lot of also trials that we don't have. Warren?
And it wasn't easy during his time either. I mean, that was Roman
Yeah.
rule, it was what Commission was, and he was one of the bad ones. So there was a lot of persecution he was in the face of those. So Christians and non-Christians were looking for something to say, there's something better than what we're going through now.
Yeah.
These trials that we're going through are going to have something far more better in the end. And this is why.
I want to be a Christian who goes to church on Sunday morning and Wednesday night, and goes to work every day, and God answers all my prayers, yes. And I don't have any physical trials, and my kids all worship God, and that's the kind of Christian I want to be, but God hasn't called any of us to do that. He's given us all different trials and different things we have to overcome. So hopefully reading through John, whatever your individual trial, I mean, we all live in San Diego, so, in 2026, so there are some common trials that we have, but we all have individual trials too. And whatever it is you're struggling with or going through, I'm hopeful that looking at Jesus through John's eyes is going to help you with that. Josh?
Talk about an easy trial for your life without trials and no spirit of road.
Yeah. Well, and I think John doesn't, as far as I can recall, explicitly come out and say, I mean, I know there are other places in the Bible that do say trials produce strength and character. John doesn't explicitly say that I remember. But it's very clear that if we lived in a bubble, if we lived the Christian life we want to live, we probably wouldn't be good Christians. It probably wouldn't be good people. Dad?
Well, if you look at the book of Revelation, it's an exhortation to the people in Rome to hold on because of the persecution in Rome. John's living that. He knows what they're going through. He's been that too. Tradition has it that he was an elder in Ephesus, that's where he took Mary and that's where they lived for the rest of her life anyway. And that church was being persecuted. So even though he may not say that, those specific words, the entire book of Revelation is hang on, that it's going to be worth it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to have that up probably most classes just to kind of remind ourselves an overview. I think, the book does, in question 4, mention John 20, verse 31. I tend to agree with it that seems to be the purpose of the book. So I have a tendency to get lost in the weeds and go on tangents. So I want to make sure when we do kind of veer off, we remember that the point is to remind us that Jesus was real. He was the Son of God. And that's important. Oh, man. That N on the second line is going to drive me crazy. I proofread this thing so many times and I missed that. I apologize. What a failing as a teacher.
Just change it to intro.
Yeah. Well, now I guess I have something to do this afternoon. All right. I think anything else on the introduction part? Dad?
Not so much on the introduction, but just in the format of the book. You asked us to look at the first lesson, and I don't see these broken up into lessons.
That is a good question. So let me kind of lay out the way things are happening. This quarter is March, April, and May. But we have a meeting with Chris Emerson the weekend of May 17th. And he's going to be doing the Bible class. And I'm going to be out of town the next 2 Sundays. So the last 3 weeks in May we don't know exactly what, but it's not going to be John. So we're going to take a break at that point, and then we're going to finish it in the fall, because the summer we have different classes. So the format is, like you probably noticed if you did your lesson, that there's not really lessons. We're going to aim for about a chapter a week. But I'm not going to be real rigid on that because we have a couple of Sundays room to move in the fall. So the goal is to be about through chapter 10 by the middle of May. But again, if we get into this and start some things really pique everybody's interest and we focus in on that, we may spend a lot of time on one chapter and maybe skim through the next. But be prepared just for whatever the next chapter is when we leave off in class. So we're going to get into chapter 1 this morning, and I don't know that we'll finish it, but do the lesson up through chapter 2 for next week just so we're all ready. John?
Well, I found a definite end.
Where?
The first lesson has 7 questions, then you turn to the 3rd page and it's question 1. So that means, to me, that's the second.
Well, I know the guy who wrote this book.
We all do, we all question.
Yeah, and he's my best friend, but I don't trust him in everything, so we're not going to use his question numbering as anything concrete. If you did a little bit, you noticed the introduction and then lesson 1 is pretty long. Chapter 2 is not very long, so as long as we're all digging into the scriptures and interested in what's going on, I'm not going to be real rigid on the lessons. So, it was funny. Wyatt asked me to do this class in, I think last September or something like that. So I had gone through and got the commentary and done lesson 1, and then things with Kenny changed, and so it switched, and I was like, oh man, I wasted my time going through the first part of John. And then I realized, well, that's a really dumb thing to say. It wasn't a waste of time. So if you do your lesson a little bit ahead, there's really no downside. You're not going to come in here and go, oh, we're not going to lesson 3 till next week. Oh man, I wish I wouldn't have read John chapter 3. So I know some of you, probably that drives you crazy, the looseness of that, but we'll see how it goes. So anything else on the intro? Okay, well, let's go ahead and read John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. That's I feel is important in every class. We do it in the high school class, and I've always done it in the adult class. If you get nothing else out of this lesson and this class, at least we will have read through the book of John. And I don't see any downside to that. So, if I could have a volunteer to read 1 through 13, and then a volunteer 14 through 18. Artemi, you do the second part, and Bob, you do the first part?
1 through 13?
Yep.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that had been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning the light, that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He only came as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God.
And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, and the glory as it were the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John beareth witness of him, and cries out, saying, This was he of whom I spoke. He that shall come after me is preferred before me, because he was before me. And of his fullness we all have received, and grace for grace. For the law was given by Moses, and grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. And no man has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, whom he is in the most of all the Father, he has declared him.
Okay. So who is the Word? What? Jesus? Do we all agree with that? Okay, how do we know that? And follow-up question, why not just say that?
He did in verse 14.
Okay? He sort of did in 14. He doesn't say it's Jesus, but we bring a lot of our own history into that and assume that's who he's talking to. talking about, I think assuming correctly. Why is this so vague? Why doesn't he just come up and say, in the beginning was Jesus?
Maybe to explain how significant the event was.
Okay,
He says like Jesus came, explains like who he was from the beginning of time.
okay. Julie?
I think they believe Jesus was a real person. His point is, he's more than a person. That's the whole thing, is that you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. So he starts with the description, and I would be like, oh, great, that's the person I want to see and know. And then he says, that person, that entity, the Word, became flesh, and you know him.
Okay, Wyatt?
Just foot stomping what was just said, I think it develops more of just his identity, but connects him to God directly and the role he had in our creation, giving him authority. So this whole narrative is very instrumental in establishing why we need to be paying attention to this.
Oh, it's interesting today, and it's swinging a little bit, but we're used to having to prove that Jesus even existed. You know, there's been questions where Jesus was even a person, whether he existed. That's swinging a little bit. You know, more people are realizing at least there was a person, Jesus, that existed. But putting ourselves in the mindset of a first century Christian, you know, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have Wikipedia, they couldn't just look it up. Most of these people were going off of the word of other people. You know, Jerusalem was a huge town, but it wasn't the world. There were a lot of people that weren't there and didn't see what had happened. So they're having to explain that Jesus was there and was real, but also that he was more than just a guy that died on the cross, which that is also a struggle we have today, that he was more than just a person that died on the cross. Dad?
This, I think, goes even deeper than that. It's showing his participation, his part, his role in creation. How did God create the world? He spoke it into existence. Who's the Word? Jesus. Jesus as God was the power of creation. When God spoke, Jesus was the Word of God. Who gave the apostles the Word? Who gave that description of him grants power to him and authority as God, but also as the deliverer of man and all the other things that are there. If you study through the Word and how God used his words
Okay. No?
Jesus is God, and Jesus is revealed, sorry, God is revealed through Jesus. He wasn't just a messenger, he was the message. He's God's heart, he's God's mind, he's God's sacrifice, he's God's truth, it's God's love. Everything that we know about God, we see in Jesus.
Daniel?
I love that. I was going on that same thought, but two pieces, that being the second one, because I was focused. It's just weird how it is, you know, you read a verse, you've seen it a million times, and for some reason it hits you different. I couldn't get my eyes off of 18. And, you know, no one has seen God at any time. Okay, makes sense. The only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father. I'm like, in the bosom of the Father? Like, huh. And then I looked that up in, what is it, Greek? Yeah, whatever thing I have on this other app, Lexicon or something. And then it go on, I get hung up on, he has explained him. And that's the part that you just described really well. It's like, oh, okay, like the bosom, this area, right? I'm trying to like break that down with the definition. I'm looking at it like, okay, it's like it like came from God, right? I remember trying to explain this to a neighbor once. We got in this conversation, like, why couldn't he peel off of what he is? I mean, it's an entity, and he's like, you know, it's like, this is my son, my bosom, and then he's the one who's going to bring everything, like Billy said, about me, about the knowledge we have. I don't know, to me, it's just, I can't explain it like I feel it right now, but
Yeah.
there's something really cool about all of that.
Well, I think, I agree with all four of you. I think, like he said, it's an enticing way to start the book, too. Because you're not just like, oh, Jesus is the Son of God, and here's a story of Jesus. You're like, wait a minute, what is going on here? And I think that's clearly purposeful. And, you know, you three kind of touched on it in different ways, but how Jesus is a part of God and the different roles, he knows God better than anybody else. But I think kind of what you were saying, Daniel, we can't fully know God. This is the part of God we can know is Jesus here on earth. Donna?
I just knew it was gonna go away.
Well, let me I'll go to Bob first and then, oh, you got it?
Here it is. God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit know that eventually people are gonna say, everybody just made this up. You know, working with the Jews hasn't worked out, so God says, gotta come up with something else, because these people are not following. So we have to know that this was God's plan from the beginning.
Well, I think John reinforces that, and it's something very hard to remember today, and I think we all need to constantly be reminded, God and Jesus have not changed. And so many times people want, well, I'm a Christian, I follow the Bible, but not the outdated parts. Not the parts that I don't agree with. Jesus is not some entity that was like, oh man, in 2026, things are going to be so different. I didn't realize that. I should have sent a second Bible that cleared it all up for that generation. He's the same, and this emphasizes he's been the same from the beginning. At this point, there's 4,000 years of history before that. I'm sure the people in Rome were going, oh yeah, those Jews back 2,000 years ago, they are so outdated. They lived in the desert. And we fall into that constantly. Bob?
And I think too, that John clearly states that he is not Jesus in verses 6 through 8. Because some people might have mistaken John for that at the beginning. He clearly specifies that I am a man of God, came as a witness through him. And he was not the light, only the witness to the light. And I think that's important to show the people and tell the people that he is not. He's bringing the word or telling them Jesus, but he is not Jesus.
Well, and I think that definitely does apply to John. I think he's talking about John the Baptist here, saying that John the Baptist was not God, But I think the point is still valid, and John will kind of reemphasize that point about himself later on, that nobody is Jesus. Jesus is something completely different, and I think that speaks to what people were doing here and what people still do today is, yeah, there's Jesus, but my pastor said this, or Jesus, but I feel this, and putting John the Baptist or John the Apostle, these people on a level with Jesus, he's saying they're not even close. Julie?
I think to our 21st century eyes, seeing John the Baptist thrown in here is we're like, well, yeah, John the Baptist, but who he's speaking to, he's trying to equate, because they believe John the Baptist was sent from God. These were a lot of people who had probably were first baptized by John the Baptist. And then, so to me, I was like, well, of course, John the Baptist is nowhere, he's not the Word, he is not God, he's not Jesus. But to them, he's trying to get them to, you gave this person, John the Baptist, your respect, and you knew he was from God. You need to do the same for Jesus, because he is truly, that person was just a witness and just passing on the message that was to come. So I just think that we kind of, I've always just kind of read over that. Why is John the Baptist in the middle of this really great explanation of who Jesus is?
Well, and I definitely think we need to remember that. And he kind of, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said what John said was right. John was a prophet. He was a good guy, but he wasn't Jesus. Don't elevate him to the level of Jesus. And I think we struggle with that a lot. Well, the Bible says this. Well, I read this commentary that said this, or I was on the internet and it said this. Well, I was talking to this guy, and we've all known somebody that, you try to talk to them about the Bible and they're parroting their favorite preacher and they don't have a thought of their own. And I think that's very applicable today, what he's saying here in the middle of this. Remember, there are good preachers, there are good Christians, there are good mentors that have really good knowledge and teaching. They're not Jesus. And don't ever forget that. Don't ever put anybody on the level of Jesus. And going back to what my dad said, this is the entity that spoke into existence everything you know. That's not John the Baptist. As great as John the Baptist was, as great as Isaiah was, as great as Elijah was, they are not Jesus. And John is going to emphasize over and over again, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. If you have lost that, if you are not focused on Jesus was the Word, is the Word, you've lost it all. No matter how good of a teaching you're following, if it's not Jesus, it doesn't matter. Dad?
One of the things that's always impressive about John is he was sent by God. But even he said, I'm not worthy to tie this guy's shoes. And that's one of the evidences of a false prophet. I'm the Messiah. They put it all on themselves. Everyone that came from God said, no, it's him.
Yeah.
It's somebody else. It's not me.
That's a good test. If somebody's saying they're at Jesus' level or above, steer clear. Bill?
Important that in John 1:1, it says the Word is with God and the Word was God. Jesus is the Word. Never forget that Jesus is fully man, fully God. I always remember that. That's really, really, really important.
We definitely can't forget that. Understand it, that's a different subject, but never forget it. Bill?
Lost my thought.
Oh.
I think that's three of us today. But all I know is that, well, the reference to John the Baptist is hugely important because he is the first step of recognizing that there is a Messiah. That Messiah came from God, came from heaven, and John the Baptist is validating that. And it's extremely important, and that's why I love John's writings, because he's so
So, I'm not sure what comments I'm going to get on this, whether I should start this question now or wait till next week, but I'm just going to dive in. Number 3, was the Word created? Why or why not, or what would you say to somebody that said he was created? Donna?
People have even started saying, my husband and I created these children. Well, you didn't. Created means to start from nothing.
Yeah.
And, I mean, to start from something, you have to have something. But Jesus and God and everybody was before that. And sure, we can understand.
Okay. Daniel?
I think that's exactly what I was trying to explain earlier. Can't do it, and I still can't do it. It's ultimately, I think, we just don't have everything we need to really, but that's what I'm thinking, like, I mean, God, the one, the only, always, as we know. Okay, now how do you get Jesus? That's the conversation I was struggling through with my neighbor. He's like, the one thing I don't believe is that Jesus is God. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, and that's why I started to tell him, like, you got God, and it's like, God comes Jesus. Like, he was there. He's always there. He's always been a part of this. Now, was he always Jesus? Now, that's the tricky part. I don't know. Was he always Jesus in there? Like, in the bosom? It talks about him being in the bosom. He peels Jesus off. Oh, this is a piece of me. Like, literally, me that's always been. That's the easy part for me. Was it always Jesus right there as Jesus? Or maybe it was, because maybe God was always like, I got this word, and maybe it's me, and I got this, because there's a spirit too, right? Holy Spirit. 3-piece set, right? So we're talking about Jesus, but it's like, but that isn't, but wait, there's more, right? And it's like, that's what he was struggling with. And I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, I still kind of struggle with that too, you know, because I can't perfectly define it, but if you took this off of you, that has always been. But what has it always been? Was it always Jesus' separate, different character, personality inside, or there? I don't know. That's the tricky part for me. Same with the Holy Spirit, by the way.
Well, I disagree with you on one point. I think it's all the tricky part. None of that is easy to understand for me. I had never really thought about it that much until I started looking into this, and then I was looking it up. A lot of people do believe that Jesus was created, which had never really crossed my mind. I'm 50 years old, and I don't know why that had never occurred to me that somebody might think that. But that there's quite a movement out there of people who Jesus was created. I don't really understand that. But I also struggle with a lot of the stuff Daniel was saying, and my dad was saying Jesus spoke into creation. How? How does that work? How is Jesus a part of God? But I cannot separate, he's described as the Son of God over and over again. How is the Son of God the same level as the Father? It's very confusing, Dad.
It takes it even further just in these few verses. Not only was he the Word that was spoken, he's also the light. He has the power of life. But God, the Father, isn't the power of life. Jesus, the Son, is the power of life. And it's the light that he brings into the world to give that power of life. And when you put all those things together, we minimize Jesus a lot.
Yeah. Bill?
So, as Barry mentioned at the beginning of the class, the ability to speak a world into existence. Woe to us if we think that we're going to be able to grasp God and everything about him. And the unfortunate thing about Daniel's neighbor is that he's hung up on this one little thing.
Yeah.
And what you have to do is you have to study, and you have to come back, and you have to pray, and you have to worship, and you have to obey his word. Those are the important things. Whether where I'm at, I can't, in terms of whether Christ was, those are the things that really matter. What matters is bow yourself to me, and I will show you.
Well, as we, were you gonna say?
Well, I mean, it's kind of confusing, but I think it's kind of like, we don't have a language to explain what the spiritual world is. Like, almost like taking someone 2,000 years ago today and showing an aircraft with a cell phone and a television, and sit in the back and try to explain that to someone else
Yeah.
in their language. They have no reference of what that is. I think makes it very confusing because we don't have the words to explain it.
Well, we're almost out of time here, so I'm going to wrap it up. But I want, as we're studying through this, like the things we talked about this morning, John is written for our faith because we're human. We're going to get lost in, well, how did he speak the world into existence? How are there three parts that are equal, that are the same? Those are questions people have been grappling with, and we're going to continue to grasp with. But we have to have faith. The faith is the key to a content and happy and faithful life. You have to believe in something. There's so much talk about aliens, and every time I hear somebody talking about aliens, it's like, well, the universe is so vast, it's statistically impossible that we're the only ones. Well, not if God is the creator. If you take the statistics out of it and you go, God is the creator, then it's not that hard to believe he created universes for us to look at. If, I have to believe in evolution because of this and this and this, well, at some point you have to believe that non-living material mutated into living material. I can't grasp that. That takes a lot of faith. Whatever you believe, it's going to take faith. And that's what we're going to talk about in this class and hopefully build up and encourage your faith, because without it, you're never going to get there. All right, we'll should finish up chapter 1 and get into chapter 2 next week. And I thank you all for your comments. Thanks. The Gospel of John is called Sunday morning, and then the Heroes and Villains one is Wednesday night. But they're both over there.
I know, but I asked James if you could just let me know you did it. Because people text me or call me, and I don't know that it got paid. But I appreciate that. I know Ryan knows. Jerry's here. Jeremy knows.
Yeah, I think Bill, you too. See Cody though?
So Wayne is here, Harry's here. I haven't seen Gavin.
Yeah.